We are deeply honored to welcome THUPTEN JINPA to this important event at the Tibetan Canadian Cultural Center. Geshe-la has been closely associated with TCCC for decades, playing a fundamental role in shaping its spiritual and educational direction. Under the guidance and blessing of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Geshe-la developed the original vision for what became the Center for Tibetan and Buddhist Studies at TCCC in the year 2007.
My fellow Tibetan brothers and sisters, it's a real joy to be here with you today. Can you hear well in the back? Maybe a little bit down. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today, and I'm particularly looking forward to the conversation and discussion with the youth, because my understanding is that the questions that you have collected has been based on feedback and reflections and questions that has been generated as a result of many of you reading this book kind of at the same time. So this is the main part of our event today. But before that, let me say a few words in Tibetan, okay? And then we'll get back to the book itself. Thomange talende kanjen chundelingiya kyardu jaje napato je gochumde gabuchu tuche shweyi laborto tanda ngema yo ta tanda yomani porude digi khangbe koba da zibo ya jaje to da ya da kanji tone ya je shi chi sha di su de khangba na ba je ani tanda mazu de moya khala sa ba ka de di kanji chundelingiya jidan shiri da dewa yo da laborto böge la ya da 벽을 슝다 두저도야 지금 산에면서 초야다 대매기 내가 뭐지 토래야 말이야 단디 내동지가 대나서 두저제를 가봐야 오늘 단에기 지수를 하셔야 아니 간단하게 시험을 제외나 장 아메리카 책을 갖다 직 야가 표현 치료야 산에 지금이야 그때 좀 치료지 조금 더 차리요래. 다시게 때부터제 이 김에 앞에 좀 먼곳에 타박기베나 먼곳에 토론토로 들어가면 차리요 다스. 디인들과 토론토로 사쿠기 디 마란즈 제주지도 나오냐. 베비 뒤에 치료지 차리요 되가야. 디기 토론토 예외에 그러면서 지도돼 차수부 용해야 베베 지기 자된다 메리를 슈슈도 체리아 시부지 되어야 내가 차대 내주 차리요래 내유가 타는데 아니 간다 지도 나오는 투부의 시간 시행만도 베버도 gembe 차네 교제지 가려서 나만 좀 더 gembe 되게 농생다 추루다 되게 돈에 촉촉대체 무수주요래 대만 보여야 만족은 벌써 지금 토요지 무슨 되게 돈에 초진에 내게 텐저 쇼제 아주 강에 대해서요. 단된 내 지도 나오냐. 투부도 얘는 하고 나중에 공유중에 남부전에 쉬게 소리야. 말한주 유슈 추부 나오는 내세되게 마지제가 뭐도 말한주 유슈인배 나오네. 견제 차대 신고제가 초대제가 디리디 지도도 마지 마테리얼스 이슈 하고 또 토론토 예리야 유럽에 다른데 교내지도 최소지 차별이 되가 야가 치고로야 배도용서 차별 educational proof of concept proof of concept 이제 먼저 교내지도 차수고 내다 만에 세트 야가 나오는 먼저 시야 뭐 차별이자 근데 제가 정말 되게 요래 말하는 시티에 교내 주수 비게 요래 laptop 비게 요래 자가 나오려야 딱 마음발이야 다 밑동제 강에 타는 것도 무시 차초마도 뭐도 생겨요 와 안장을 이제 되게 쉬워요 되게다 딱 자가 치료로야 하고도 능조 롱발이야 되게 되게 신부지 초어제 아니 푸다를 배우토네 쿵큐라 마셔다 차주가 마주세에 드론으로 지금 딱 빼도 차기가 나 드론도 슈글에 비제 뉴욕 지금 차기가 미네소타요래 근데 장생 동안에 생애 만나봐도 공부 싫어나 말한주 베베지도 치고 차기 슈글에 지도 코로나 불이야 차주고 해야 돼 개지고 싶 차대서 뒤에서 그냥 내가 믹스에 가보죠 그래서 드론으로 슈니에레 올 슈니에게 내집을라고 돌게 투시셰슈에 베드르 아 그렇게 토를 저렇게 요마를 페뉴케 요마를 되네 그거지 매차네 베베르 슈스무족다 균에다 게이다 슈차베야 나버도 차례나버디 망부지금 미부다사시 차야래요 디제 앞으로 오늘 돌아올 서클이야 그러면 치게기요 치게 뒤가요 가로시자 친구로 와 도들이 양 지금 치게요 여기 자가 시작을 저렇게 민망하다 치게 시작 민용한테 딱 그러고 성당사 돼요 말이야 그런로 더 차샤잖아 뭔 시작을 체 차려라 그래서 늦을 단행에 믹스에 손하수 친구 좀 아니 경험 이제 네 간제 최대한 믹스에 토레 쇼친 거 나요 그게 참을지다 쌓여 개발 나요 나부터 제발 캔들 봐 토레 쇼친 거 나요 토레 쇼친 거 나. 아니 이 간다지 게일 르숑을 교육이 결합을 낭출을 방부지 되네 쉬게 소리야 간다 게지 림바도 틀다도나 록쟁이도나 납토야지다 투로로라 감제와 차제 리베리베트 치토나야 버서 군주는 까나요 그래 두즈나부터 캔들 그래서 군주네 투로 쇼신분 나요 땅에 군주기 부서도 쇼투다 말때 얘네 최과제면 군주 통제부 용그래 다는 데를 무슨 폐회나 다들 대내당 간제 주변에 그냥 세고 근데 투기고 있고 투기고 용과 인상 등주리에 라마티베 추리 그리고 라마티베 좀도 추고 투면 나오는 주변 추어서 까신 저거 집에 추어가 추어 계실 쓰기 와 인상 단행이 내 고급 생제 나머지 상만 투시 제슈에 마음 발라이네 간다 심슈 못네 나로나 수시슈에 능원 내가 So I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and as someone who had the privilege to serve His Holiness as the main editor for this book, one thing that I was deeply touched was the way in which the younger generation of Tibetans truly engaged with this book. You know, I don't do social media myself, but I do have WhatsApp, so many of my colleagues and friends and family members send me the images of what was happening in the social media world, particularly from the younger members of our community, sharing their feedback, critical reflections of what they got out of this book. So this youth engagement with this book has been truly encouraging for me, particularly, and I also shared that with His Holiness when I was recently in India as well. And one of the things for me, of course, you need to read the book, and many of you have already read it. But this book should not be viewed simply as an autobiography of His Holiness, telling his story. Yes, of course, that's an important part of the book, which is autobiographical, because His Holiness was at the forefront of the movement right from the beginning when China invaded Tibet from eastern Tibet in 1950, when he was forced or compelled to take on the leadership of a nation under attack. Since then, he has been at the driver's seat, as it were, and has witnessed the tragedy of the Tibetan nation over this long period of time. And His Holiness, and one of the things that you will learn from this book is the amazing courage of His Holiness. You know, Yangila referred to this, His Holiness's first meeting with Chairman Mao. You know, all of you are probably older than 19 years old, and you can look back to your own age when you were 19. Where were you? Imagine at that age being confronted with the leader of this massive nation called China, very aggressive, communist, country, who has just invaded your country and who has summoned you to Beijing. And to be confronted with that, the courage with which His Holiness has responded. And in fact, I read in one historical book written by a Chinese author. And according to her, Jiang Li, who sadly passed away last year, Jiang Li, based on study of the records of Chinese sources, tells the story when His Holiness met with Chairman Mao in this session. You know, both of them bowed in an equal fashion, and he did not kowtow. So there was this amazing courage and confidence on the part of this young His Holiness to be able to confront one of the most powerful leaders on earth. So His Holiness since then has really lived with the Tibetan struggle. He has personified Tibetan struggle. You know, for over 8 years, he made attempts to seek some kind of accommodations within China based on assurances Mao Zedong gave, but it turned out to be completely unrealistic. It was just simply on paper. When the realization came that the struggle for Tibet has to be waged from outside, he left in 1959. And after 1959, if you look at the history of exiled Tibetan community, you can see the far-sightedness. Right from the beginning, His Holiness's first priority was not rebuilding the monasteries. It was establishment of modern schools or modern education of the youth. There was a long-term strategy, and then, thanks to Indian government's help, His Holiness was able to establish separate school systems for Tibetans, so the Tibetans don't get dispersed and disappear in this massive sea of people that is India. And then similarly, establishment of the Tibetan settlements in southern India and various parts of India is what ensured the viability of a small community of Tibetans. We were just at that time about 60, 70 or 80,000 people. 80,000 people sounds like a large number, but in nearly 1 billion India, it's nothing, it's a drop. But even then, we were able to survive as a distinct people with a pride in our heritage, in our language, in our culture, in our Buddhist tradition. That's all because of His Holiness's far-sightedness. And most importantly, His Holiness set the tone for our struggle. You know, he could have chosen a path of self-pity, saying, oh, bad God, you know, what a tragedy, we're so unfortunate, it's our bad karma, there's nothing we can do. We can go the self-pity route. Or he could have chosen the path of anger, hatred, revenge, and taken up arms. He did not do that. He showed us a middle way where we can take pride in our own heritage, confidence in who we are as a people, with a long vision of struggle, and continue and persist in our struggle. And he set that tone so that the Tibetans not only survived, but we thrived. Not only did we thrive, we were able to make offerings to the world. Look at all the Tibetan Buddhist centers across the world. You know, these are all set up by Tibetan lamas. And then His Holiness's own engagement with the West, contemporary science, contemporary society, contemporary culture and thought, has given rise to a whole level of appreciation of Tibetan culture and its value, and so on. So I remember about 4 or 5 years ago, I was traveling, and a colleague of mine from Mind Your Life, he's quite a big business person, and we were chatting, and then all of a sudden, he talked about the size of the Tibetan community in exile, and I said, we estimate it to be roughly around 150,000. And he was completely shocked. He said, what? Such a small number? How can you have such a huge imprint on the world? That is in who we are. Of course, it's primarily thanks to His Holiness. So I think we Tibetans, yes, we are victims of tragedy. We lost our country. You know, we are in exile. But at the same time, we have not wallowed in self-pity. We have maintained our head high. And we have been able to also continually keep the issue alive. After more than 7 decades, 70 years since occupation, invasion, Tibetan issue still is alive. China, with all its power, with all its masses of military and population and economic power, has not been able to erase Tibet. You know, it tries. Right now, it's even refusing to call Tibet Tibet. It's calling Tibet Xizang, using a Chinese word. It tries everything. At one point, it tried economic incentives by, making Tibetans feel they can make a lot of money in Tibet, economic development. But now they are trying to even erase the word Tibet. But the issue still remains. And one of the most important aspects of this book is for us to understand what is the essence of our struggle. We are a small population. We are never going to be able to succeed by waging an armed, struggle. If anything, it is the worst scenario because they will give the perfect excuse to wipe us out. You can see what's happening elsewhere in the world today. Just because certain sectors of the community resorted to violence, it has given the perfect license and excuse to commit massive amount of killing. So we're not going to do that, but at the same time, we can always question the presence of China on the plateau because Tibet belongs to the Tibetans. That is a historical fact. We Tibetans have been on this plateau, on the Tibetan plateau, for over thousands of years. Our history predates the Common Era. Our first king is Nyakisembo, which is before Common Era. Our written history starts from the 7th century. Since then, we have existed as a nation, as a people, with our distinct language. And what is happening today is tragic, but from a long-term view, it's a part of an ongoing, unfolding story. There's nothing written on stone saying that this is an unchangeable reality. So for us, the most important thing is we need to carry on. We need to have this long view. We always need to be sure in who we are. And here, Tibetan language, culture, and identity, particularly identity, is crucial. And that's why the younger generation, those who are in a free country like us, like ours here, I think each one of us really need to take this seriously. What does it mean to be Tibetan? So that your sense of Tibetanness, yes, we are all Canadians here, but Canada is not a nation under struggle for its existence, even though some threats are being made. But Tibet is a nation that is under struggle, existential threat. And that is part of our identity which we have to hold dear. And we need to pass it on to every generation, even if it takes 10 generations before we gain our freedom. That is the kind of long-term view we need to adopt. And for that, some ability to transfer across generation what it means to be Tibetan, or what Tibet means to us. And part of that, His Holiness, although does not speak about it, but my sense is that one of the most important things is the emotional connection with land that is Tibet. Some of us may be fortunate to have gone there. I have never been able to go, although I was born. But we need to find a way to emotionally connect with Tibet as a land, as a country, and have a sense of ownership. And our identity of Tibetanness needs to be connected with our sense of ownership of that plateau. Political, actual legal status, whether Tibet should gain independence or whether it can exist as an autonomy, is a secondary issue. It really is a secondary issue. The fundamental issue is the survival. continued survival and thriving of Tibetans as a people. And this is where the great wisdom of His Holiness has shown us that for that, you don't need to insist on restoration of full independence. That it is possible within a framework of PRC, the Tibetans can survive and thrive as a distinct people. Because if China is serious about its vision of People's Republic of China that was established in 1949 as a composite of multiple nationalities, then Tibet, they should find a place for Tibet and Tibetans to be within that family. And within that multicultural, multinational family, it is possible. That's what His Holiness envisions for Tibetans as a people within that multi-nation state to exist as a distinct people with a custodianship of the land historically that we have, that has belonged to us. I think that really is the essence of our struggle. And one of the things that His Holiness has often said is that once you are convinced of the nobility of the cause, your commitment and dedication to the cause should not be contingent upon whether that goal could be achieved in my lifetime or not. Because if you are going to be engaging in something only if it can be achieved in your lifetime, then there is a selfishness attached to it. But if you are truly convinced of the nobility of the goal, then it shouldn't matter how long does it take for that goal to be realized. And when we are talking about a cause like Tibet, we are talking about the struggle of a people. Generations will come and go, but people remains, nation remains. So when we think of Tibet, we have to think of Tibetan as a people, Tibet as a nation. Nation can exist within a country. So the problem in Tibetan, we don't have a separate word for nation and country, but in English we do. And in English conception, it is not contradictory to have nationhood within a country. So if you think of United Kingdom, Wales and Scotland are nations within a United Kingdom, and that's why Wales and Scotland can send their representatives to the Olympics, representing their nations. So Tibetans, we should, even though we are not asking for full independence, but we should not give up the idea of Tibet as a nation. So this, I think, is really crucial, and as we go into future, there will come a time when His Holiness will be not around. We need to make sure that His Holiness and the institution continues to symbolize both the people and the nation. That is the symbol. And when we engage in struggle, our struggle is not just for protection of human rights. Our struggle is for the survival and thriving of a nation and a people. I think so. That's why I wanted to take this opportunity to, reach out particularly to the younger generation. These days you have access to quite a lot of rich resources on Tibet, its history, and as much as possible, the younger generation should really take the time and opportunity to really study Tibetan history so that you have a much richer understanding of the complexity of our history, and you are coming from a place of confidence when you speak about nationhood of Tibet. Up to now, the elder generation have had the luxury of the active presence of His Holiness as a symbol traveling around the world. So long as we don't fight among ourselves, we were kind of quite successful, because His Holiness was the face of our movement, of our struggle, of our culture, of our civilization. And everybody, wherever His Holiness goes, everybody knows the Dalai Lama of Tibet. So we have a much easier job, the elder generation, when we are continuing with our struggle. The younger generation will have a tougher time. The younger generation would not have the luxury of that kind of powerful symbol. So then the strength of our struggle has to be based on merit, based on our ability to project the story, tell our story, own our story. When the time comes that our story cannot be told by ourselves and has to be told by someone else, we would have lost. So Tibetan, we have to ensure that we own the narrative. We are the masters of our own destiny. The story that we tell, the story that the world believes about Tibet has to be the Tibetan version. And this is, in essence, our struggle with China is a struggle of narrative. We are not going to go back to Tibet and fight with guns. Our struggle is a struggle of narrative. Whose version, up to now, thanks partly to many to His Holiness, so far as the international community is concerned, the the story that everybody knows about Tibet is our version. It's the version, and it's the truth. Fortunately for us, it's the truth. But just because something is true does not mean it's the one that is going to be accepted. But our job is to always make sure that when the story of Tibet is told, it is not the version told by our oppressors. That, in a nutshell, is the essence of our struggle. And the younger generation, you don't have to join CTA to do the struggle. Each one of you, in your own capacity, through writing, through blogging, through responding to the articles that are appearing in major newspapers, whatever opportunity you find, narrative is the key. Narrative power, and owning that narrative really has to be the key. So that's one thing I wanted to share with you. Thank you. So we have